people worrying that the number of Conservative MPs could fall below 100, which, would be completely inconceivable and astonishing for them. They are also looking at some of the polling around reform. There are genuine fears that they could swap places and that reform could actually jump above the Conservative Party in terms of popularity.
Look, this troubling news from the palace about the Princess of Wales. Rishi Sunak has already sort of spoken about it. What are the political impacts here? Are there any?
Not really. I mean, I think it's about stability. It's about the country. It's about, reassuring people that, all is well, that all the traditional day-to-day duties of the functions of government and of state are still happening. I mean, the only real thing that the politicians have kind of intervened on is this idea of, trying to make sure that the princess gets as much privacy as she can possibly get at a time where obviously her and her family are going through a very difficult period. And I think that they're sort of also sort of trying to encourage people to stop the kind of speculation that's been surrounding this family for the last couple of weeks and let them sort of deal with what they've got to deal with without any further intrusion. And I think that it kind of speaks to this kind of, I suppose, really difficult question is, did the princess have to make this statement at a time that potentially would not have been of her own choosing because of that speculation and all the conspiracy theories that had been aired about her disappearance and her whereabouts and what was going on, and this kind of sense that she'd been forced into making a statement that perhaps she wasn't ready to make at this time. And I can imagine, being a mother of 3 children myself, the absolute sort of thing in your mind is going to be about protecting those young people and not, alarming them any further. And I think having to make a kind of public statement clearly would add to that alarm. I mean, obviously, the children are not necessarily of an age where they'll be reading newspapers, but they'll certainly be watching television and all of those things. And I think that it will be very difficult for them not to be able to see the kind of, fact that this has now become a big story.
Then the last thing you want is the world looking over your shoulder at a time like that. And of course, the world are, and we are doing now. But it's the function of modern royalty. The other huge troubling story today, of course, is about this terrorist attack in Russia. That's presumably relatively difficult for British politicians to respond to because we are involved in a war with Russia very much on the other side. This is an attack that appears to have nothing to do with that war, and so the tradition is that. Not the tradition, the moral imperative is that sympathy and concern would be expressed. How are people responding to it?
Well, they have expressed sympathy, actually, and David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, has already tweeted effectively saying, our condolences are with the people of Russia and the people that have been killed in this obvious atrocity in Moscow. So yes, I mean, it is tricky because I think there is a kind of natural kind of instinct of, how do we feel about this, given that, the huge crimes that have been committed in Ukraine, and I think that does elicit some difficulty in the way we respond. But I think actually that the more difficult thing is what on earth is going on here. And obviously we don't have a kind of it's been suggested that this is ISIS. We haven't had that confirmed. We've had no response as yet that I'm aware of by the Russian state or by President Putin himself. I guess there will be some nervousness, particularly from the West, and it was interesting to see just how quickly Ukraine came out to say, look, this had nothing to do with us.
Very, very clear, we don't do this sort of thing.
We don't do this kind of thing. And, there will be some anxiety that that obviously somebody like Putin will use something like this as a bit of a red flag moment and potentially try to use it to his own advantage. Because obviously, if you look at some of the things that have already been suggested, that credible warnings were given that this could happen and that people should stay away from public events and from crowded places, warnings that were given by the United States to Russia that effectively seem to have gone unheeded, it does create some questions, I think, for President Putin and his regime if innocent victims were effectively thrown to the wolves because they didn't act on credible intelligence. So, of course, that will all be playing out in the minds of the Russian state at the moment, and it will be fascinating to see how they respond to it and whether they actually, try to deflect somehow that criticism by suggesting it was somebody else or had some other motivation or intention. And I think until we know how they're going to respond to it, I think the West will pretty much sit back and wait for that to play out before they make any further intervention.
Well, it's also a reminder that that Russia is always it's basically has is a huge place, and is dealing with other things and other threats and other security issues that aren't necessarily always focused on Ukraine,
Absolutely.
regardless of how it may appear to us. Returning to home more directly, Rishi Sunak. So like last week, he looked like it looked plausible that he was about to face more leadership challenges and stuff. Does that appear to have all died down, or is it just biding its time?
I mean, it was interesting that it bubbled up last week. I think it bubbled up because there was genuine discussion about whether he was going to call an early general election. That was fueled by the fact that he himself asked the question to the 1922 committee, what are your thinkings about a general election? And the 1922 committee were fairly quick to tell him that they didn't want a May election. As one of those on the committee told me, that, as Samuel Johnson says, if you think you're going to be hanged in a fortnight's time, it does rather sharpen the minds. And so I think there was a sense that if that election was coming, they weren't just going to sit there and be kind of cannon fodder. And there were thoughts about what maybe they might do to try and replace the Prime Minister. I'm not sure that this was something that the vast majority of the party were thinking about. I think still there is a sense that this would be bonkers to try and roll the dice a third time and to have a sort of third unelected Prime Minister, so to speak. But look, do I think it's gone away? No. I think the local elections will be a huge flashpoint for the party. I think there are genuine concerns about trying to stem the losses. People worrying that the number of Conservative MPs could fall below 100, which, would be completely inconceivable and astonishing for them. They are also looking at some of the polling around reform. There are genuine fears that they could swap places and that reform could actually jump above the Conservative Party in terms of popularity. And I think at that moment, there are going to be people that are going to be thinking, look, if we can get a bounce with a new leader, is it not worth it, given that the current status quo is now so unpalatable,
Given
that
that
actually doing nothing is worse than doing something which is almost inconceivable in itself. I don't think that's where everybody is. I genuinely don't think that's where everybody is. But certainly there are more sensible people now sort of saying those kind of things than there were even a couple of weeks ago. People that at that point would have said to me, this is totally mad, of course we won't consider it, are now falling into that camp of, well, perhaps it's not as mad as we thought it was, and potentially it's something we might consider. But there's still a long way to go. I mean, I think actually, interestingly, I think London is key for them. I think if there was any prospect of Susan Hall winning the keys to City Hall, I think that would be something that would buoy the Conservative Party and potentially be a bit of a shield to the Prime Minister if the rest of the results are dismal, as so many people are forecasting. So there are still things that could change the trajectory, but I think we will see a lot more noise on the plotting front next month and early next month.
What sense do you get of the mood in Downing Street itself among Rishi Sunak and his circle? Because this is just, they're doing so disastrously badly. The polls are so remarkably low, challenging Liz Truss at her lowest.
Yeah.
This can't have been what he expected. I'm sure when he became Prime Minister, he knew there was a decent chance that he didn't win the next election. I don't think he would have ever expected that he was going to be doing worse than Liz Truss.
No, I think that's true. I mean, look, I think the mood has been difficult for a while. I actually think they've had a better week this week, and they will think they've had a better week this week. I think they've been buoyed by the inflation figures, which obviously haven't yet translated into sort of lower mortgage rates for people, because the rate cuts are now not expected to happen until June, which I think is something that will kind of temper the whole discussion around when we're going to have a general election. I think it's very difficult for them. It's fascinating, really, because I think these are problems that have kind of been both engendered by their own political decisions, but they are still very much living with the inheritance that they gained from Liz Truss. I mean, the particular thing around, mortgages and the fact that people are paying more for their mortgages is something that they're going to have to live with all the way through, because, every month people are remortgaging and are finding that they're paying more than they were.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that they could really have done very much short of doing an income tax cut that would have had a kind of really big effect. And the arguments that they make are really sound in terms of why they did national insurance and not income tax. But I don't think it's resonated at all with the public. So, they would say that they've done something that they think is prudent, but is actually going to help more people. But actually, it's still not having that cut through. And I don't think that they can really work out why that's happening. So they think that the more that they talk about it and the more that they try and sort of talk to people about the economy, which is why we've got Jeremy Hunt on the TV programmes again tomorrow, only a couple of weeks after, of course, he did it at the budget. I think that is their core message that they are trying and clinging on to, is that the economy, they hope, has turned a corner. And that's the message that they're trying to portray to the public.
Let's talk about Jeremy Hunt a moment, because he's across the papers this morning talking about how he wants to lift the £100,000 earnings threshold for claiming free childcare, because he says £100,000 is not a huge salary in his constituency. That sounds like a winning position. I mean, this is presumably what he's going to be asked about repeatedly tomorrow if he's all over the airwaves tomorrow.
Yes.
That sounds like, I mean, for such an experienced old hand, this sounds like a sort of one of those sort of stumbling comments people make that haunt them for the rest of their careers, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, yes.
Yes.
I mean, yes. I mean, people obviously that are on average salaries that are, really struggling with the cost of childcare. And don't forget, this comes at a time when I think the recent statistics suggested that people were paying sort of up to £900 a month for childcare. Actually, I remember when I had two in childcare, sort of part-time, because I had twins, it was costing a significantly greater sum than that. And in fact, my childcare costs were way bigger than my mortgage.
Yeah, same, absolutely.
For a long period of time, I was paying to go to work rather than looking after my children. So I think it's pretty insensitive that he would talk about this. I mean, I think that they're trying to sort of quantify this and say, they want to help people that are obviously earning more money but still feeling the pinch. And obviously the sums of money that are involved in childcare are such that, anybody on any salary, I think, struggles to pay for it because it is such an enormous chunk of what we get paid. But no, it does strike me as being extremely tone deaf.
Yeah, you can't be Chancellor and say £100,000 isn't a big salary.
No.
I just don't think that's okay.
And it plays into this whole idea that they are wealthy.
Yeah.
They are the billionaire, the billionaire Prime Minister and the millionaire Chancellor.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that is true. And the riposte to that are the likes of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, who don't fall into that category. And, that is one of the dividing lines that, is going to play out during this election, but not one necessarily that Jeremy Hunt would be wanting to fall into.